to week 1, module 3. So this is our last module for the week. So we're going to continue talking about what the sociological perspective takes into account. So the social organization is another component to the sociological perspective. So a society is comprised of all the individuals in it who are linked and organized by their common culture. Each individual plays many roles that are ranked by importance. The ranking creates social organization. So within that, we have social context, and these are the social structures or stable patterns of social relations. So Mills in 1959 coined this, called the sociological imagination. So he argued that sociologists' main task is to identify and explain the connection between people's personal troubles and the social structures in which they lie. So individuals, this involves recognizing the 3 levels of social structure. So it can be broken down into global, macro, and then micro structures. So microstructures are the patterns of intimate social relations formed during face-to-face interaction. So in our microstructures, we would consider families, friendship circles, work associations. Those would all be examples. So I'll use myself as an example. So my microstructures would be like my core family unit, which is my partner. And with him, I share 2 children, so Lucran and Micah. And then I also have larger family networks. So I have my parents who help and babysit and watch my children, and my in-laws, which also do the same, and extended family. I also have my circle of friends, and then I have my colleagues within Sioux College. And so those all would be examples of our microstructures. Then we have macro structures. So these are patterns of social relations that lie outside and above your circle of intimate acquaintances. So like all of, like when we look at where we're part of, like Sault Ste. Marie, like where that's part of our macro structures. So they're not necessarily part of our intimate circle. So within, like, you could consider like the entire Sioux College community and the post-secondary community. That would all be part of like macro structures. And then we have global structures. So that's the 3rd level, and that's international organizations, patterns of worldwide travel, communication, economic relations among countries. Those would all be examples of global structures. So you can see this would be an example like of how the rings intersect. So you have the micro in the middle. So this would be where your family, I'm using my hands because I'm so used to lecturing that way, but that would be your family intimate circle would be in the micro. Macro, you have outside of your intimate circle. So like all of Sault Ste. Marie, community resources, things like the local hospital and the local food bank and things like that would all go in your macro. And then global would be Canada and the Canadian economy. And if you even think about how you can put COVID-19, the pandemic we're living in, under these 3 levels of social context. So in our micro, we have like your intimate family, and there might be people within your family that you're really concerned about, potentially people that are high risk or things like that, people that are working on the front lines. Then you have your macro level of resources. So you have the hospital, and you have Algoma Public Health, and you have like things that have been implemented across Sault Ste. Marie and within the Algoma district to protect people. And then you have globally, you have this is affecting every part of our global economy and how it's affecting international travel. And you have like community of scientists all around the globe working on developing vaccinations and treatments and things like that, right? So you can see how all 3 social structures would work when we just would apply to just something like COVID-19. Okay. And then we also can see how personal problems are connected to social structures at the micro, macro, and global levels. So we can use the example of COVID-19 again, right? So we know that COVID-19 has impacted pretty much every facet of our lives. I'm going to use COVID-19 as our example of how it's changed social norms even, right? So you think about, which we'll talk about that in our live class, so I won't get ahead of myself, but you can think of COVID-19 and the implications that have arisen because of it, right? So in the microstructure, you might be really concerned about your family, a family member, or yourself, or keeping, how are you going to do with remote learning and things like that. And then at the macro level, there might be issues with layoffs and finding a job and finding employment and all the changes. And then at the global level, you have like huge shifts in the economy and changes to legislation and places being shut down and things like that, right? So you can see how like all those three structures would be implemented. And it's even as simple as finding a job or keeping a marriage intact or ending world poverty. You have to consider the micro, the macro, and the global influence. So that's it for our content today. So during our live session, I'm going to explain the in-class activity, but I'm going to be asking you to look at two different families who've had a baby, and then we're going to look at the resources and the need to consider the micro, macro, and global structures that are in place when a family is trying to meet their needs. So hopefully this all makes sense for you, and please make sure that you're bringing any questions that you have to our live Q&A sessions. Anyway, see you on Monday morning at 9:30.